Hello. In this example, we're going to go over um, when we run a cast to from an event coming from Stripe to Salesforce, how to work with nested objects. The cast to by default does not expand objects or explode subclasses out by default. So what we have to do is we actually have to assign that value coming out. To do this, I'll use subscriptions and products as an example. When we come in, we can see that I'm listening to my event table like we would, right? Stripe events, and then I have actions, and as normal, I just set up run asynchronously in case we wanted to do a call out. But you can see I don't have any conditional requirements set or anything like that. I'm just running this as an example. Now that I'm listening for the event, the next action I want to take is I know I want to work with subscriptions, so I'm running a cast to subscription here. And again, I'm just passing in the request body as we would with any other event we wanted to handle inside the universal connector. Now that I have my parent class object, I can actually start to pull out the other data. And inside this data, we have the subscription items here. What I actually did is I created a variable here. So I'll run through that again. So what I did was I created a new resource. I made it a variable. I gave it an API name of subscription items. So I'll just call this sub items. And then for the data type, it's Apex defined because again, we're working with a subclass. And what I want to do here is set this to subscription items. So I can see I have subscription items here. And the thing to remember is it's actually returning multiple values because it's a list by default. And to show that, what I did is I actually loaded the JSON object into a JSON editor. And I went in and looked to see what I was trying to pull out, which was items. And then I can see there's a data underneath this. And then we can tell that it's an array. Obviously, most of the things we turn back are lists. So going back to my Salesforce flow, I know I need to allow this to be a multiple collection. So I'll just go ahead and say done here. Now that I have my subscription items, I'm just going to make this a simple equal. And then since we've done the cast to here, I'm just going to go ahead and say select that object, and then I'm going to select items. And I can even see it's telling me what the type is that's coming out. And I know that the data here is the actual array that's coming back. So I'm just going to say data. Once that's done, I'm now creating an array of sub items underneath this. So just to recap, how did we know what variable types to set and everything else? So once we had the cast to set up, I can then come in and I can see items and I can see the type that this is. I can see that it's a subscription item and it's a list. And then inside that list is the data, and that's the actual list of the the subscription items coming back. So I'm setting that here. I'm doing the same thing in this one, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete this, but that's the exact same thing we did here. So that's how we set the first value to the subscription line items coming back out of the event. And then you want to loop over them probably to do something, whether you're creating objects inside of Salesforce or you're taking some other action with them, but you're probably looping through each subclass at that point. So inside the subclass, what I'm doing is now that it's an actual Stripe object inside of Salesforce, I'm just pulling out a couple simple values to show you how to do this. So I have line item ID. So if I want to pull the line item ID, now that I'm working with a loop of subscription line items, I can click in the current item, and all of a sudden I can see all the different data that's available inside of Stripe. So I can do things like ID, for example, since I'm pulling the line item ID, and then maybe I want to grab the product ID. So what I'll do here is, again, I'll go through the current line item on the loop, and what I'm looking for is price. Inside of price, we have different values here. One of them is product, and I can see that's the product ID. And all the other values are in here as well, so I could actually dot walk down into all of these If I needed to, I could even create subclasses if they were, part of a different subclass. But for this example, we just want to grab the product ID. So I'm going to go ahead and go back into my loop. I'm going to go into price, and I'm going to select product. Now that I have that done, I'll run a simple test here, and I'll just put this in a simple debug mode. Let me save my changes. Now I'll go ahead and run this in debug mode. I'm just going to tell it to skip conditional. I'm going to say I want to run it asynchronously. And I know I have an event here that's an actual subscription create, so it actually has data. And I'll go ahead and click run. Now, the first thing it did obviously was create the subscription object from the event. So we can see that got created here. So we created that object, and then inside that object were some of those nested classes that we wanted to pull out. And in this case, we were working with subscription line items. So we can see that what we did in the assignment was we set this array of subscription line items to the actual subscription items data piece here. And then that actually created those line items. And then you can see when we're looping over each one of these, then we are assigning the individual product values, right? So now that we're inside the loop, we're actually assigning values here in the assign individual products. And I can see that I'm looping over and I'm creating a product ID here, which is our Stripe product ID, and the subscription line item here. Again, you could pull out any value you wanted to, but you can work with the subclasses. You just have to cast them, because by default, since we're casting to individual objects, it can't create the subclasses underneath that object. You actually have to assign those subclasses based on the values being sent back.